Hello again, and for today, I am going to delve into something that has been on the list. If you've noticed, I have not talked about the hatred of the prequels in most of these videos, and that is because we're getting to it in today's commentary. Now, Star Wars days were numbered before Disney took over, and for me, what that title says is that there was a problem within Star Wars, and I do not want to just make a fuck the fans video, but the people who hated the prequels are the sole reason as to why we are in this shit right now with Disney and Kathleen Kennedy and fucking J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. And yes, George Lucas could have surrounded himself with people that had the balls to say no to him every once in a while. That is true. That is correct. That would have made the prequels better movies. But that's not the reality we live in. And instead, the reality we live in is a reality that people hated the prequels so much George Lucas sold his company to the devil. You know, he sold it to the people who are completely against everything he stood for as a filmmaker. And I don't know who said that recently that I'm kind of cribbing that from, but to me, when I heard that statement, I was like, holy shit, that's so correct. You know, like in the Empire of Dreams documentary, George Lucas talks about how much he hated the studio system and how he just wanted to make his own things. And yet, a lot of people will argue now that he became the person that he absolutely fucking hated. But at the same time, he also sold his beloved property, his child, to people that he absolutely detests and despises. And it was so apparent when Bob Iger put out those fucking statements and those excerpts leaked from his book that he is just a fucking idiot, just a goddamn retard, that he did not even think that would be considered bad publicity, like really bad publicity, like, oh, so these movies aren't even worth going to see kind of bad publicity when it comes to Star Wars and Disney. But let's get into the timeline of what caused George Lucas to sell Star Wars. Now, we have the Star Wars prequels come out, and the first one came out, and people really liked it, and then they saw it the third and the fourth and the fifth time, and they're like, oh, this movie sucks. Jar Jar Binks is terrible. Anakin Skywalker is so whiny. These characters are just kind of props. There's too many politics. And, you know, these are the kind of generic fucking arguments that were given to why episode 1 sucked, and then episode 2 came out and it was kind of more of the same. Anakin Skywalker's whiny. This romance doesn't work. There's too many politics. And yeah, and then it just makes lightsabers fucking into, oh, everyone's got one now. It's like, yeah, there are multiple Jedi Knights running around the galaxy. This is that 4,000 generations. The Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Republic before the dark times. And then the third movie came out and people were like, hey, that's pretty good. But at that point, it was almost too late because the prequels' hatred set in. And you only hear people really say Revenge of the Sith is good, like now that we've got all these other Star Wars movies from Disney to compare to. And so, with all this prequels hate, you know, we go through the 2000s, and, you know, it comes and it goes, and the Clone Wars cartoon comes out, and people are like, oh, more prequel shit. Why can't George do something cool? Like Star Wars Underworld. And, oh man, it's just so crazy to think about that kind of history. And, you know, especially as someone like me who loves the prequels, even with all of its flaws, I just, those are some fucking times to be a Star Wars fan, man. It was just like 40 and 30-year-olds being like, "That's not the Star Wars I grew up with," and me, I'm just like, okay, boomer. But then something happened in 2009, and that something, of course, was the first episode of the Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace review from Mr. Plinkett and Red Letter Media. And with this review that Mike Stokowska released, the arguments on why the prequels were terrible movies solidified. The characters don't have necessarily strong archetypes, that they don't have like good personality traits that are easy to identify through their actions. The plot is kind of all over the place, and the stuff that you now hear from people who shit on the prequels, because that to me is like the worst part of those Plinkett reviews, is that anytime you hear someone say I hate the prequels now, it's like they literally just wrote down all the points that Plinkett made, or Mr. Plinkett made, and fucking are just regurgitating it at you. And they have nothing original to say about why they don't like the prequels. But at the same time, that reignited the hatred of the prequels. And, it got to a point, I think, where it boiled up, that, when people would see, like, Jake Lloyd in the street, they'd fucking make fun of him. And I actually have a story that I knew some kid in high school who had a friend who went to film school with Jake Lloyd, and they apparently bullied his ass for being Anakin Skywalker. And that to me is so cringe, because, like, bro, he was in a movie as a kid that he thought it was going to change his life, or at least his parents and his agent did. This kid who was only in, like, fucking Jingle All the Way. And you have the balls to fucking make fun of him while he's trying to do better by himself by going to film school. Like, you're a fucking worthless weasel. You're a worm. And again, Jake Lloyd, like, right before The Force Awakens came out, got arrested for a DUI. And it's just like, yeah, that guy's life is essentially ruined by people who fucking hate the Phantom Menace. Same thing with Ahmed Best. Ahmed Best, who played Jar Jar Binks, everyone would go after him, and he apparently got death threats. And again, I don't want to make this video about fucking hating on fans, but it's like, to me, the behavior of people who hated the prequels is so much fucking worse than the Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace has got shit on the people who hated the prequels, who drove fucking George Lucas to inevitably sell Star Wars in 2012. Like, okay, if Disney were to sell Star Wars back to George Lucas, that would be a victory at this point. That would not be a loss. That would be an absolute fucking grade A victory. Because it would just prove that you can't fuck with someone's creation and get away with it. But that's not the reality we live in. We live in the reality where Disney owns Star Wars and has consistently ruined it across, like, soon to be 3 movies. And yeah, it's just so funny to me how this kind of came about. It's just like this simple, oh, I don't like the prequels, and then the Plinkett review comes out, and then people are like, oh yeah, now I'm vocal about how much I hate the prequels. I'm going to go online and say how much I hate the prequels. It's not like everyone was in the fucking minority hating the prequels. They were in the absolute majority hating the prequels. There were people like Patton Oswalt doing comedy bits about how I had time travel only to kill George Lucas with a shovel in 1993 to prevent the prequels. Brian Posehn being like, oh, when episode 3 starts playing, I think they're going to just cut the movie, and then a Dune Negrito mask will walk out and just come all over us. They call it the special edition. Like, it's just so asinine to me that like, the Phantom Menace gets all of this, like, vitriol from these betas, and fucking just cringe-inducing femoids. that's saying that, we're the problem. It's like, no, the people who hated the prequels were the problem. Those were the people who fucking drove George Lucas to sell Star Wars. And if you disagree, well, then please deliver the argument in the comments section. And be sure to like and subscribe, too. Because I got a couple more Star Wars videos before the month's out. And, just to start concluding, if the prequels weren't as hated as they were, I think George Lucas would have fucking lived at the end of the day, and he would have gone through with the sequels and maybe learned from his mistakes of, maybe I should bring in Lawrence, maybe I should bring in Gary before Gary Kurtz unfortunately passed away. Maybe I should bring in all the people that helped make Star Wars so great that weren't just me. Because at the end of the day, there were a lot of people that fucking made Star Wars great. Countless fucking people on the crew, but from like Joe Johnston to John Dykstra, Richard Edlund, Phil Tippett, all those practical effects guys, even though they were late when Lucas did his first check-in for Star Wars for the special effects dailies, and some of the shots were just not good, they pulled fucking through once George Lucas was like, no, we gotta do this better. And so, I hope George has learned his lesson, and whatever he makes next, he'll, talk to other people. And I hope that people who hate the prequels and are now seeing the sequels being absolutely fucking worse have learned their lesson of, shit, maybe I shouldn't fucking drive a man to sell his child. Maybe I am the problem. And so, in conclusion, to all of the prequels haters who have gotten what they fucking deserve, tread lightly because... What's this? We're only 2 days away from the rise of Skywalker, and it will be glorious.